Well, let me address that and address something else, because it just relates to what Mirea was saying, and it relates to what has happened not only in macrobiotics but other health teachings. Everybody seems to live by stories. There's certain stories that we tell about things, and then I did it for many years. You just reinforce the same stories. Some of it was makes it difficult for people to change who have been practicing these more vegan styles, is that they reinforce the story that animal food is bad for you and it's the cause of all illness, it makes you less spiritual, it makes all these things, which basically, if you look around the world at people, indigenous people who ate animal food, that they are very spiritual, it appears, from how they talked and how they lived, and they didn't, if they were eating natural animal foods, they didn't get sick, they didn't get cancer, they didn't get heart disease, they didn't get all these illnesses. So, some stories that we tell ourselves can be helpful for a certain time, like, maybe to get us to change, we, adopt some of the stories and we feel good. But then when the story, new information comes out, we learn more things, then you have to change the story, like, finding out that, this fast muscle movement is created by something that's only in animal food. It's like, so we have to change the story. So there's a lot of different reasons that people think, and it's related to these stories, and stories are myths, but a myth can be true or false. It doesn't have to be all. They're myths. We tend to think that myths are false things, but they're not all false. There's some good stories, and there's some false stories. And so a lot of people will think, they'll come up with a story as why they feel good because they started the all raw diet, or why they started the mostly vegan macrobiotic eating. It's because they are not eating animal food, not eating sugar. Part of the story might be true, because commercial animal foods have added stuff to them, like hormones and pesticides and refined sugar when it's a big part of the diet. Part of that story is true, but part of the story may not be true, like the part that it's all animal foods that are bad, or that it's all sugars that are bad, because you'll hear people in other things like low carb movement or paleo have a whole story about why every sugar that you eat, whether it be from fruit or white sugar, is bad for you. And one of the things that I've discovered is that the real reason, there's some big reasons why people feel good adopting all these natural approaches. Part of it is they're eating vegetables. They never ate vegetables before. They're cutting out junk. They're cutting out junk food and chemicals and processed foods, and they feel good. And then there's another interesting thing I found, that they feel good. And the reason they feel good is when they do something severe to their body by cutting out a lot of concentrated proteins that your body needs, or cutting out fats that your body needs, or cutting out calories that your body needs, your body goes into a stress mode. And there's a good part of the stress mode and a bad part of the stress mode. The good part is that a lot of changes happen for some people in the stress mode. They break down their cells quickly and rebuild them so they look better. They get a jolt of brain energy from the stress hormones, so they feel better and they have more energy. So a lot of the changes are occurring. They might do some healing in the stress mode because these things are going on. But then after a period of time, depending on how strong the stress organ is, which is your adrenal glands, these glands that sit on top of the kidneys in the back here, inside, then the stress honeymoon is over. So 6 months for some people, 9 months for others. People with very strong adrenals might go on for years, or they might start doing habits to kick the adrenals even in more gear, like doing vigorous exercise, drinking coffee, smoking cigarettes, doing something to stimulate. But eventually...
John, so right here, you're talking about a honeymoon period,
right,
of certain periods of time, but then Mirea had also brought up that there are some people that, and we know this as well, that didn't do well at all.
Right.
And they didn't even go that far to a month or 2 months or 3 months after an initial introduction. So is that because it's not appropriate for that person, according to their condition, to be
right,
doing that low-calorie fasting style diet?
Well, that I think has to do with, there's a understanding of the stress. Many people over the years, since the 1940s, when the first researcher did this, start to study the effects of stress on humans, all kinds of stresses. The reason why some people don't do well, and they understand this when they study about stress, is that when people are under stress, initially they produce all these adrenaline, cortisol that revs up their system and breaks down and builds up their body quickly. But then what happens is if you're under continuous stress, the adrenals then start to shut off systems. It starts to slow down all the systems in the body, and depending on which ones you need more, so your brain's going to get more, it needs it, your heart needs it, but then other systems will start it'll provide less energy to them. So someone who's been really stressed in their lifestyle and their diet from the modern American diet, or people who have for years eaten really narrow, restrictive diets, are going to find that they start to eat a more narrow, vegan style, low fat, low protein, macrobiotic way of eating, that there is no stress hormone, honeymoon. There's no, because they've been stressed so much, that extra stress they can't handle. So they can't stick with the diet, they can't do that. They need a different approach. And this would fall under the macrobiotic umbrella if the umbrella was bigger. Because then you might say, okay, well, this person actually needs a real nourishing diet, which includes naturally raised animal foods, natural meat, natural chicken, natural fish. They may need more nourishment. In fact, most of the people that I find who came with serious illness were incredibly stressed, either from the medical treatment or from their diet and lifestyle for so many years, that they actually need more nourishing. They need more nourishing type of macrobiotic way of eating. Macrobiotic mean taking into account, what nourishment a person needs. Some people need extra nourishment here, some people need extra nourishment there. So I think that accounts for why I saw, and Mirea was saying she saw over the years, some people couldn't stick with it because their body was saying, hey, I can't do that, I need something else. Now they might go and search something else, but some of the things inadvertently might have helped them, like say someone's recommending lots of supplements and they're really nutritionally deficient, they're going to feel good if they add in the supplements. In fact, in studies I've done over the years, is I do use nutritional supplements with people because I find that some people have depleted them so much have become depleted, they have to take supplements to build themselves back up. Other people require more supplements. These pioneers in the 50s, doctors and nutritionists found that, especially this one particular doctor, Williams, Roger Williams, not the singer, but Dr. Roger Williams was a pioneer in this when he talked about nutritional bio-individuality, that some people require so much more vitamins from birth than other people, and they have to take some supplements. The big example of that is people who are born with a tendency towards schizophrenia. They really need huge doses of B3 to moderate their moods, and some people can actually manage their condition by taking much larger doses than you could ever get in food. And that's the idea, Dr. Williams' idea of this biochemical individuality, that you need more things. And in fact, that if you talk about balance, that's actually a macrobiotic understanding.
That's right.
Because someone's born without enough B3, you give B3, they function. They feel better, like you were talking about different things people need. The other aspect of that is that over the years, maybe it's because as I get older, that I'm starting to understand there's a hierarchy of what's important for people. Like for instance, number one thing we need that's really important is to get adequate calories. A lot of health diets, including macrobiotic eating, will say erroneously things like in some of the books and teachings that calories don't matter. Well, there's a lot of research about this. You can't just make it up. Calories do matter. A certain amount of calories do matter. Different for different people, but it does matter at different stages. So that's like the biggest thing we need to get in our system: adequate calories, energy. Then after that, we need macronutrients. So we need a certain amount of carbs, certain amount of protein, certain amount of fats. So that say if someone was poor and couldn't afford natural animal food, they at least need animal food for protein. I mean, that's a hierarchy of needs. Now, in the ideal, you would get something like naturally raised animals, without chemicals, pesticides, or at least hormone-free if you could afford it. But if you don't get the protein, you're going to be in a lot of problems. So the protein that's the hierarchy. Then more the refined aspect of that is get natural animal food. In fats, the interesting thing is that the body does better with saturated fats and monounsaturated fats. And there's a lot of evidence that these polyunsaturated fats really cause a lot of inflammation and lower your metabolism. So, that would be, the hierarchy is you need saturated fats from things like at least butter or from natural animal foods, and then monounsaturated from olive. Now, if a person couldn't afford to get the better quality butter, at least butter would be helpful without chemicals or any dyes in it. And even the olive oil from the supermarket, the better quality one that they could get would be the best. Now, if they want to refine that, they could get the good organic extra virgin, and they could get the butter from grass-fed animals, or even get something like coconut oil, which is a vegetable saturated fat. So, the hierarchy of needs that most people, if getting away from junk food would be, with chemicals and additives and dyes and preservatives would be a bigger issue for people. And if your diet is more nourishing and you get off the addiction to that by eating nourishing foods, what I call the 3 square meals, with grains, some natural animal foods, vegetables, some fruits and things like that, it's easier to get off the addiction. So even for people who can afford, there can be a supermarket style of what I call, the real balanced macrobiotic eating, which anybody can do. And then the further refinement, of course, is always improving the quality of food, picking better quality.
However, there are people who will want to continue with a vegan or vegetarian diet. So in those cases, I know it's been very important to us to take the judgment out of what people are eating. So it's up to the individual who comes to you after you give your information what type of diet they would like. So if somebody wants to remain vegan or vegetarian, then how do you help them to not be nutritionally deficient?
Well, in the big picture, and practically speaking, it's easier to be vegetarian than vegan and balance your diet, because you can get quite a good amount. There's a misunderstanding. One of the stories that is not a true story, that you can get all the protein you need from grains and vegetables and beans, and I know myself, I taught that many years and thought that, but then I didn't look really closely, and I realized that when you look closely at that, you have to eat a huge amount of grains and beans to get your protein from that, because there's not a lot. Like, for instance, to get 40 grams of protein a day, you'd have to eat something like 3 cups of cooked grains and 3 cups of cooked beans, which basically is hard to do, at least that much beans. The beans would be hard. Maybe the grains would be okay, but the beans. But then that would be very little for someone like me, who's 6'2". I need something like 60 to 80 grams of protein. So I'd have to eat much more beans. It wouldn't be pleasant to be around me. It would be a lot of gas going on. So that's not practical. So if someone has some things like some whole milk yogurt or raw cheeses or some other dairy foods, and they eat some eggs, it's easier to get in that ballpark. They may need to supplement with some other foods, like B12 is missing. And for vegans, you have to use, go to the point of getting some kind of natural protein powders. I don't recommend soy ones, more like rice or pea protein if you want to be totally vegan. And then the nutrients that are added to make a person safe with that kind of eating are the nutrients that you would get in higher amounts from animal foods. So because the animal foods are very calorie dense because they're more fatty, then you have to really make sure that you get a certain amount of calories from things like grains, grain products, some refined grains like white rice, as well as some natural sweets to get your calories up. You need a saturated fat because that helps the body stabilize, so coconut oil would be the ones for vegans. And then the nutrients that would be in animal food that would be supplemented would be things like B12, zinc, B12 and zinc, and sometimes a B complex, and for some people also some kind of vitamin A supplement, because theoretically you can get vitamin A from vegetables, but you have to make sure you eat it with a lot of saturated fat, because your body won't convert the carotene from green and yellow and orange vegetables into it. Now, if someone didn't want to take the vitamin A alone, they could just try to first eat lots of that, make sure they have a good amount of those fats with those green and orange vegetables. I also recommend that people avoid or really limit tofu or tempeh, because it can hurt the thyroid. Maybe cubes in miso soup if they want a few times a week, if you had a miso soup. And really focus on, cooked grains and vegetables to get the more calorie density, in their diet.
Excuse me, would that be a miso soup, or with the cubes of tofu, or like in Japan, something that would have fish in it, a fish broth with the tofu?
Well, for someone who's vegan, it wouldn't be the fish broth, but the seaweed broth would help balance some of the seaweed.
Okay.
Because there's goitrogens, these substances that hurt the thyroid in that. Now, people who want to be totally vegan, if they want to focus more on the whole foods, although I think for most people it's good to eat foods without bran and bran of the grain category, because the bran can be irritating if they don't eat. So white rice can be incorporated, even a good organic one if they want to go for quality. But soaking grains a long time, like for a day, 24 hours, and getting rid of the soaking water will help the person get more nutrients like iron and more zinc and calcium from the foods they're eating. Recent studies have found that calcium is not so much of an issue as is things like vitamin D and magnesium. So certain foods have magnesium in them. So surprisingly, very high in magnesium source, where not everybody would be from coffee. Coffee is high in magnesium. But also, green vegetables and some other foods will have that. For vegans, I also recommend they don't overdo nuts and seeds and nut butters, because those fats can cause a lot of inflammation and lower the metabolism.
And what about the overdoing of the greens and kale and collards, the big popular, and the greens juices that people are completely unaware of?
I think for calorie density, people have to eat lots, who want to be vegan, have to eat more cooked food so it becomes more concentrated. Otherwise, if they eat a lot of watery food, it lowers the metabolism and they don't get enough calories. So, and things like raw kale and raw kale juice is very high in goitrogens. Cooking kale lowers it as long as you throw away the cooking water and limit it to no more than a cup or two a day, of the cooked green, not the raw green, the cooked green.
I'm really glad you've gotten into those points, because earlier we were talking about how important it is to have really all the complete nutrients that we need. And it's not as simple as that, because there are deficiencies we need to overcome, make sure we don't have the deficiencies. But as you're talking about now, there are things we can get excess of, the excess of the goitrogens. We need to know the proper cooking style, we need to know what foods not to have so often. And I think that this is also really important information to have. And for myself, going to college for this last year, I'll tell you, it was really challenging for me to afford the high quality food that I wanted to have, because for the last at least 40 years I've been eating exclusively organic food, because I don't want the excesses of the pesticides.
Right.
And when I switched to meat, beans are a lot cheaper than meat.
Right.
But I've done enough research to know that the kind of saturated fats in the commercially grown meats, or they're not grown, but whatever they are, commercially raised meats, is very different, that fat, than in the fats that are from the animals that are pastured. Right? So it also, the animals are treated better, consciously, the ones that are pastured. So there are all these different things that are important to me. And meat is more expensive than beans, but it's one thing that I got to really understand how expensive high-quality food is. But I value my health. If I had to give up something else to have that high-quality food, and I found that when I used to have really tremendous cravings for a lot of grain. I'd eat grain and I'd want more grain. And I find that incorporating meat into my diet, I wasn't craving sweets anymore. It was really strange to me that I felt very satisfied with much less grain. And it was just a beautiful process to be in. But I do think that a person that has been vegan, quite often, they really care about the treatment of animals. And I do too. I'm willing to eat the animals, and I think that is a natural, personally, my personal belief, it's a natural, process in life and death. But I don't want to be responsible for buying something that keeps the mistreatment of animals going. So these are just ways that I find are important to me. And the most important thing for me is I have the results in my health and for my conscience.
So John, why did Mirea start experiencing less of a need for grains as a result of incorporating the protein into her diet?
Grains and sweets.
Grains and sweets.
Mm-hmm.
What would be the mechanism for that change?
Well, I mean, there's a certain richness, and particularly you have to really, as I studied in the last years also calories, is that you have to go for a lot more whole grain to get your calories and more sweets. And depending on the person, the size of the person, the activity levels. Like, for instance, if someone is super physically active, they're going to need, some more sugars in their diet. They're going to need some kind of grains to get that in. But if you're, moderately physically active, adding in the animal foods, then you feel more satisfied. You don't require that as much. And I think there's a role for all those foods depending on the person. They're helpful. But you're satisfied. And I think it has a lot to do with calorie density as well as, feeling satisfied that you don't need, some extra jolt. But I like to say that in the sense that I don't think there's anything wrong actually with the grains or with that, but there's overeating whole grains can cause some problems. When I did studies of traditional cultures, it turns out that no brown rice, 100% brown rice existed in Asia. They took a lot of the bran out, and on purpose they tried to get as much bran by hand before they had the machines out, because they knew something about the excess of bran. In parts of Africa, millet wasn't eaten, the grain millet.
Is it too rough on the system?
It's rough on the colon. It rips the colon.
It's just too hard.
It rips on the colon, and there's a few friends who passed away after eating more vegan style macrobiotically of colon cancer. I met a few people I knew a few people personally who had that problem, and it's quite possible all that bran, excess amounts of bran could be irritating. That's why I often recommend people could start to incorporate more white rice. Good quality if you can get it, like organic, because people who eat white rice, as long as the rest of the diet is good in parts of the world, are extremely healthy. When they're poor, nobody's healthy because they're missing things, but it's also rough life, so the stress. So there's, that it makes sense that you'd be more satisfied. Other people have told me, they're more satisfied with their foods, and they don't require, the balance changes. Now the balance may change again, because what I've discovered is that things like natural sugars are de-stressing for the body. There's some evidence that they de-stress the body.
What would you call a natural sugar?
Well, a natural sugar would be, from fruit, from fruit juice, from things like natural sweeteners like maple syrup, rice syrup, raw honey, organic molasses. They have a de-stressing effect, but some have, the more stronger the sweet, the more they de-stress. So they may, maybe too much for some people at different times. So there is an effect of foods on the body, and all foods have different effects. And in the more vegetarian-oriented macrobiotic approaches that we studied and practiced, the only problem is that it wasn't, I don't think we were explaining, I was, and other people were explaining, the true effects of foods, the overall effects of foods that you can feel. Like the building effect of eating a natural meat, compared to fish. Something like a natural red meat will be more stronger than a fish. Or the relaxing effect of a natural sugar or starch. The grains will have some relaxing effect, other ones will have more relaxing effect. And if we can really teach that, then people can understand what foods do to them and how they affect them. One thing to mention about animal food is that there are certain animal foods that, fortunately, they're more and more hormone-free. So if someone can't get totally organic, they can get hormone-free. Lamb is an interesting food because most of it is pasture-raised, even if it's not naturally raised, because they can't keep sheep in confinement. And then there's an issue about, you mentioned something about that, idea that someone who's vegan may not like the idea of eating animals. Well, there's several different people who have talked about this. One of them is a book called The Vegetarian Myth by Leah Keith, and she talks about the idea that everything in nature is eating everything else, and that everything has consciousness, from your vegetable to your animal. And there's a bit of a prejudice among that has happened since Peter Sawyer wrote his book of animal liberation in the 70s, I believe it was, which started the animal rights movement, that we relate more to the animals, that the species that look like us. So we don't feel bad for the kale because the kale doesn't look like you or me, but we do feel bad for the cow because it looks more like you and me. But they all have consciousness, and that everything is eating everything else. That's the natural cycle of life. And you go back and look at the history of people, all these things that are sometimes made up, even by some friends who are macrobiotic teachers, that hunter-gatherers never ate lots of meat. Well, that's impossible. Because they estimate that if they ate 60% vegetables, they need 12 bushels of vegetables a day. The only way you could hunt and gather that would be in the supermarket.
Yes. Yeah. I don't know where they came up with that theory of theirs.
So, very interesting, a lot of myths around vegan eating. When you think about it, actually, we have done so much harm also to the soil and to plants with all the pesticides and the farming methods. There's been so much abuse there. I was at a conference, an organization, dreamchange.org, put on a couple of weekends ago, and John Perkins, a New York Times bestselling author of Confessions of an Economic Hitman, who went on to become very involved with shamanism, and he, at the dinner table, was talking about the consciousness of plants and how he didn't agree that that would be a reason to not eat animal foods, because all of the traditional cultures and shamanic culture, the plants, for their consciousness and our interaction and how the plants would speak to them. And he experienced this with these traditional cultures. So that idea did not hold water. Everything has consciousness, but it's really how we're treating everything in our path in life.
And I think that the other thing about my experience with the traditional cultures is that there was a tremendous gratitude and thanks to all of the plants and animals and everything for the support. When you eat something, you're grateful for it. And it's a very different experience when you're living with nature, and this is like your family, the plants and animals all around you, than going into a supermarket. And I think not being part of the natural world, we're so cut off for it. And I think there's a loss of gratitude. It's just, it's just rote. You go in, you buy something, it's wrapped in plastic, you go home, you cook it. And we're not in relationship and connection as traditional people were. So it's something that I think it would really benefit people to get out more in nature and appreciate it. Also, when you're in nature around plants, you're also getting better quality air. You know, there are so many gifts that the plant kingdom gives to us.
Yes, yes, and you know, I was thinking that really what we have been teaching all these years is a health food store type of macrobiotics, because once I read Lierre Keith's book, A Vegetarian Myth, and began to understand about the cycle of life and nature, and realizing that there really is no such thing as vegan in nature.
That's so true.
A plant is not vegan. A plant needs animal life in order to grow because of all of the nutrients in the soil, all of the bacteria in the soil. She talks about trying to garden without manure. And so in nature, and I think, I don't know if Lierre said this, but somewhere I read, you know, farmers, if they were to listen to these vegan ideas, it would just absolutely make no sense to them at all, because it's not what is happening in nature. So
the farmers that are in touch with nature, I mean, one of the things that when I learned I was so shocked by it is that the modern agriculture puts chemicals and fertilizers that actually kill the earthworms and kill the bacteria. And so there are very different ways of farming. So destroying the land in order to grow a vegetable that doesn't have all the nutrients in it that manure would have given it. So this really separating nature, thinking that we can control something, and instead we produce Frankensteins.
And Lierre talks also about all the little animals that are killed in agriculture with the big equipment.
That's
I mean,
right.
there's so
By
many
the chemicals and the equipment.
Yes, so, you know, this is the other issue that comes into play, the environmental issues, the sustainability issues, people talking about we have to, you know, cut our consumption of meat because it's hurting the environment. But really, this is not a meat issue, it's a population issue. You know, we are using up all the land, we're destroying the land, we're reducing our ability to be able to farm because of what we're doing to the soil. And so people are misinterpreting really the cause of our problems. We have so many more people to feed, so it's not really that people should not be eating meat. People may need meat, and we've discovered that we have had to incorporate it into our diet for health benefits. But it's a misinformation a lot of people are buying into, and it actually prevents progress from being made in the direction of healing the soil, because to heal the soil you need the animal input as well. And there's a man that John did a webinar with, Alan Savory, who talks about how there's so little land left on the planet, and he shows it in NASA photos that you can have agriculture on. So much of the land is in a state of desertification, where the land is turning to desert, and he's developed a method with cattle that is capable of restoring the land. It's a specific system that he's using called holistic management. So, you know, I think we really need so much education around nature, really how things work in nature, not in the store, not in a book, but actually out in nature itself.
Besides the, you know, the model he's using is interesting because it's a computer model that imitates the wild herds, the movement of wild herds. And there is, you know, even with the current population, you know, with the if we could reclaim the land and then use the grazing land and move away from factory farming of animals, we'd have more food. But there's something that, you know, just I was thinking of as you're talking about this, is that, you know, that we at the point where all the Japanese teachers who introduced modern macrobiotics have passed away, almost all of them. And so this is a time where they were naturally, it's a time to actually you might say, reimagine macrobiotics for in the biggest sense, because they were teaching something naturally that was from their own nationality. So they emphasized all these Japanese foods because they were naturally proud of them. And it was almost the impression that we had to have these Japanese foods, which I've been eating for as many years. So I like them myself, but unless we can make them here, they're really not necessary for health. And some of them, you know, one of the best miso companies is in Massachusetts in the world, so we can have it, and we can switch over to sea vegetables from closer by, Atlantic, which is probably healthier given conditions going on in Japan now since the disasters there. The thing is that the local food movement, with an understanding of how food affects us, is really the macrobiotic movement. And so if we're living in this area, there's certain grains that grow here, there's certain animals that grow here. The best fat, you know, if we were going to be local and sustainable, would be butter. There's fruits, there's vegetables. Now we're not currently limited just to that. We can eat foods from other places. But that is going in harmony with traditional macrobiotic principles that are even for Japan, which they had a concept called Shindo Fuji. Body and soil is not one, is not two. You know, that's how it was a funny way of saying it, but they say body and soil not two, which means it's one. So we need to eat the foods of our environment primarily, and then we can have a little extra of other things if we can get them. But that's, you know, really, I think the future of a macrobiotic understanding is that we eat local and we become one with the environment. And of course, for the people who do that, if they go to the farms and they go to the farmers markets and they spend some time in nature, they'll actually feel that link more. I think a lot of the modern health movements are really kind of heady city type of movements. And in some sense, we're all live in the city, you know, because we're not living the same way. So the paleo movement imagines how people ate 30,000 years ago. But you know, but it's really more of an imagination, because as we learn more, we see, oh, the paleo people really ate differently than what they're saying. And then the vegan movement is imagining that this is the way. Even they tell a story where people like this ate around the world, and this is the way they ate around the world, but that's not the story. Or they say the story, well, this is the way for the environment. They heal the environment, but that's not really even true too, because if we have mono agriculture with vegetables, we're going to wreck the environment just as much as factory farms. There has to be another, the story is not so simple as that, you know, it has to be, if we really want to go back to, you know, say helping the environment, we need to go through mixed farms and naturally raised animals and get away from mono agriculture and smaller farms, and the answer is not so simple.
That's absolutely right. You know, I was thinking when you were talking about how some people say that the amount of meat production is you know, wrecking the land, and I really appreciate the information you've given. I do think also that a large part of the American population, say for example, isn't it true a lot of people are eating fast food?
Yes.
Well, what do people come out of a fast food place with? Are they coming out with a hamburger and kale and carrots and squash and a salad? No, they're coming out with a hamburger and french fries, and that's it, right? I went on a cruise with my ballroom dance group a couple of years ago, and it was a really interesting experience. We had, you know, everyone in the group was, you know, really health conscious, and they had reserved some tables for us in the dining room where the meals were really fabulous. Such wonderfully prepared vegetables and fruits and meat, and really good quality, right? But I experimented. I went to different areas, and there was one cafeteria, which started out with the salad area and then the vegetable area, and most people bypassed that, and most people that ate in the cafeteria, you'd see them walking by with their trays, and there would be hamburgers or hot dogs on bread, and then some kind of potato, and that's it. That was it. And you could see the difference in the health of those people and the people that ate in the dining room. It was so obvious. They were way overweight, they had pasty skin. You know, the people eating in the dining room had all this variety of vegetables, but a lot of people were eating in the cafeteria, and it boggled my mind that they're going on cruise with all this wonderful spread of food, and they're eating fast food that they could have eaten at home. And to me, it's like an addiction of a way of thinking that they're relating to that that's who I am. I'm the kind of person that eats this kind of food.
There could also be some chemical addictions to the chemicals in the food that they're eating as well, because we see that with children.
They absolutely. But when you think of if those people had also, if they had taken the hamburger, but if they had put in all of the different types of vegetables and salad ingredients and things, you know, they would still get healthier just by doing that. And they probably would be able to eat less meat if they had a lot of other foods on their plate. So, you know, it would be that balance. You'd have the animal farming and you'd have the vegetable farming, and they could complement each other.
Yes.
It might be interesting that, though, it's interesting, it might be the kind of people that would come to the Kushi Institute when I was working there many years for counseling, but the majority of them did not overeat animal food in my consultations. But it could be the kind of person who's attracted to that.
Yes.
Wasn't that kind of person. But that was a given. Like, they didn't eat the burgers and they didn't eat a lot of that. In fact, often they skip meals and they. So I wonder if those people. Yeah, it could be their regular eating, or maybe they're indulging on a holiday.
Well, the people who are coming there may have had some health consciousness that they were following to a certain extent, because they were a candidate
and
psychologically.
That's what
to
attracted them
this.
to try
They
food.
could have been more open to it. So they
John, the other, and Mirea, the other issue around exclusive plant food eating is that it's been discovered scientifically, and it's been taught in macrobiotics too, that the nutrient content of all plant food is down considerably because of the modern agriculture methods. Even though it may be organic, food is still affected by the environment, by water, by the air, the rain, so forth. So I wanted to bring this up also because this is part of the need potentially for supplementation, for taking some supplements, because in macrobiotics they would tell you not to take supplements. You can get everything from this vegan diet that they're promoting, primarily vegan diet with fish twice a week, which you have said that you might as well consider yourself vegan, that the fish twice a week is not going to give
less,
you,
people
yeah,
are
or
often
less, if they're even doing that. But in recent years, it's really gone more in the direction of completely vegan, because when they say, oh, you can have it, it's kind of like, well, you can, but you know, you really don't need it. So do you think that this is playing a role, you know, the nutrient content of the plant food also in the need for supplements?
Well, I really actually don't, you know, from somebody who went and did that research, because I think that was more done because the idea is that people need to eat primarily plant foods. And so the fact that the certain plants have less nutrients, a lot of the nutrients that are less, people would get traditionally from animal food. So it's like they couldn't get those, nobody ever got those nutrients that are less in the vegetables and fruits from vegetables and fruits anyway. It was a supplementary part. The reason for supplements, I think, has to do with, you know, years and years of being stressed, where the body uses up tremendous amounts of nutrients. Like your adrenals have your adrenals in your brain have vitamin C pumps. They need lots of vitamin C. Or it's, you know, some research shows that if you have an active infection, and I think a lot of people have active infections that they don't know about, you need about 7 grams of vitamin C to promote leukocytes, the white blood cells, a day. So, you know, I think there's other reasons for the supplements more than what's in the vegetables and grains, like zinc. Zinc participates in 50 immune functions, and in the modern diet, I think people are missing that in the modern diet. There's been a trend to eat more chicken over the years, get away from red meat. The only source of zinc in the modern diet is actually red meat. So there are people not eating much red meat now, and they're getting their, you know, they're going and getting chicken and maybe some eggs and maybe some cheese on their pizza, so they're not getting zinc. People, don't eat a lot of green and orange vegetables, which have enough beta carotene in them if they would eat them with enough fat for some people. But the conversion is really bad. And then if someone happens to be eating a lot of the burgers, high amounts of protein, excess amounts of protein use up vitamin A. So then the only source of vitamin A traditionally in diets were things like naturally raised dairy products, grass-fed cows, dairy products have vitamin A. Naturally raised eggs have more vitamin A. And people are eating less eggs. And they're not eating the yolk where the vitamin A is, so they're eating the white. And then the other sources were organ meats and fatty fish like sardines, which not a lot of people eat, both of those things. So then vitamin A deficiency is quite common. There's an interesting research that shows that people who eat meat are becoming B12 deficient, even though they're eating meat.
And why is that?
Probably to do with digestion and absorption, because the rest of their diet is bad, or their metabolism is dropped, so digestion is not functioning, stress from money, stress from not enough exercise, some people stress from too much exercise, not as many. So they're not absorbing B12. They're going to need B12 as you get older, and especially if you're not so healthy, when you get into your 60s, a lot of people don't absorb B12 from food. So they're going to have to take B12. There's a lot of different reasons that occurs
Okay,
that they
so
would need that.
is it true though that the nutrient content in plant foods is down?
It's according to what I've seen, it is down. Though I don't know if that's going to be making the issue that you need supplements so much. I mean, I think there are other issues.
As long as you eat the meat.
As
But
long as you
might-
eat the meat.
Yeah, but I think that, you had mentioned something, one of you, and I forget exactly who or exactly what, but that it really is on an individual basis. It really is individual. I know my son and I were involved when he was only 7 years old. He's 34 now. But when there was a study of B12 in macrobiotic individuals, and my son and I both tested high. And yet people that were also eating macrobiotics, some tested low. In fact, there was a couple that were eating the same diet, and the man was low.
How were you tested though?
Urine.
Okay, so urine has been found to be more effective, but not completely.
But even still, I'm saying that within that
Within
one
the urine
group,
group, right.
within that group of people tested, there was a wide variation in obviously.
Do you remember what the high was?
Oh, as I said, my son is 34 and he was 7 at the time, so no, I do not remember that.
Okay.
But I do remember how surprised I was. I thought a group of people eating basically the same way would either be all low, all medium, all high, and it just gave me that clue that we really are unique. And say, for example, some people in the same situation will be more stressed or less stressed. And so some people will be getting more or less exercise. Some people have a genetic, say for example, like with my gluten, problem, which I don't consider a problem because I just stay off gluten and it's fine. But it's we are so unique, and that's kind of what I'm hearing you say, that someone might be fine just having the meat and the vegetables, grains, beans, nuts, seeds, whatever. But some people, it might be their stress level, it might be genetics, it might be whatever, that it really is very individual. And I'm wondering, as we're discussing this, like I know it was very, very positive experience for me when I was exhausted and I just didn't want to get up and tried changing my diet and working less and nothing was helping. And I had this blood test. I thought I might be low in B12 or thyroid or vitamin D. I never guessed that I would be fine in all those things. It was that my body was not producing, my pancreas wasn't producing very much insulin. That test helped so much, and it was actually an expensive test for me. It was like $400 something. But that $400 allowed me to make the right decision. I got a blood sugar monitor and saw how our food's affecting me, and that's what allowed me to say, okay, I'm eating meat, and now I can also eat grains and beans finally again, because now it's working. So I would say that since it is so individual, I don't know about you, but I would recommend that if someone could afford to, if they're eating a very varied diet, you know, and it seems like it's providing everything, if they're still not getting better, I would say that something like a blood test to find out what's going on with them might be very valuable. What would you say?
I think that would be helpful. It's just one thing to understand about B12 is that it doesn't show up in the blood well, especially if you eat a lot of greens. It gives a false reading.
Oh, I love greens.
And it gives a false reading, and D levels are often incredibly low. They find now what they think is normal is too low.
Right.
And the B12, and the interesting thing earlier, depending on how long you're eating, you know, that kind of style of macrobiotics many years ago, that some people will recycle B12 for a period of time, and then it all of a sudden stops. And so there are a lot of issues with the blood that are interesting, because B12, like, I never really put stock into B12 there, just only because the researchers find that it's not good. And I remember when we had, someone came to test the macrobiotic community I was involved in Middletown. And I thought, you know, the urine test, it was measured in picograms, and I thought, you know, I'm just at the low end, it's 200 picograms, and it could go from, you know, 200 to, you know, 1600. And then I found out, you know, from later research, that was tremendous deficiency. 200 was tremendous deficiency. It was not fine. And the normal goes from 700 to 1600 in the urine.
Yeah.
So that, you know, I think that would be helpful, especially if you had someone who knew how to interpret it to help the people.
John, the masking of the B12.
It has to do with folic acid. Because greens are high in folic acid, or if someone was taking a B complex, B12 is not absorbed through the stomach if you're B12 deficient. You have to actually have a shot or under the tongue, or a spray under the tongue or something like that. So B12 is something that, one of the best books is a book called Could It Be B12? It's by an emergency room doctor and nurse, husband and wife. And they are the ones who talked about all of this B12 deficiency that's not being diagnosed in the hospital, because it's hard to diagnose, or they wouldn't ever suspect to look for someone who is eating meat. And so it's a tricky thing with B12.
Would you therefore recommend something like a sublingual supplement for most people then?
Anybody who is eating fish once a week, especially white meat fish, or twice a week, or not eating any, has to supplement B12, because B12...
even if they're eating meat?
If they're eating meat every day, after 60, I probably would recommend having a supplement a few times a week at least.
B12
B12 under the tongue.
Interesting.
Because absorption for everybody after 60 becomes a little less, even if you're more healthy.
Okay.
And most people will feel something from that. They'll notice the difference when they do it or they don't do it. And, you know, if someone was taking, say, like 1,000, 2,000 milligrams 2 or 3 times a week, you can't really get excessive in B12. The body, some people try to scare people about supplements, but if you do a little bit of research, you realize that I think there was no death in the last 20 years from supplements, and the ones that were before that were pretty strange, like someone took the whole bottle. It's like, so it's not like they took a little bit of it.
I never heard of death by supplements.
Yeah, but there's, you know, something like close to, it's a very high 100,000 of something from the right use of medicine.
And what about vitamin D? Because I know a lot of people don't get enough sunlight, especially those of us that live in the Northeast. What would you say?
Well, there's some, I recommend, you know, the sources that are like, there's a, one of my favorite is to get a cod liver oil. And a cod liver oil, if affordable, there's a fermented one you can get online. If you can't afford it, there's probably one of the highest levels of D is a brand called Nordic Naturals Arctic D, because they have more D in it. And some people will take a supplement. If you do take a supplement, you have to take a D and a K supplement to balance each other. And
So
and
does that supplement come with both of them?
it doesn't come with both of them, but there's a company that makes one called Super K, and I think it has like 1,000 or 2,000 vitamin K of the absorbable type. And vitamin K is again only really absorbable in animal foods.
So it's not a combination, so you have to take
No.
one, the Super
So
K
for every
and the
10,000
vitamin
of D, you have to take
Mhm.
like this Super K, you know, some company makes, if you look for that brand,
That's good to know.
it balances it. But
But
most
for
people do
people-
better in the Northeast getting in the equivalent of something like 10,000 IU of D a
In a
day.
supplemental form.
Supplemental form, and then some K can be taken with that. And there are some interesting people who are doing research about using higher doses of K to basically heal joints and heal injuries. You know, there's some man who gives a real inexpensive ebook on the internet about K, about the use of D, you know, with K, and he's had some really interesting healing incidents of healing joints and
Nice.
repairing them from injuries he had when he was young.
Okay, well, we will have to end for now and continue, I hope, later with this conversation. I think it's very important for going forward and, as you said, reimagining macrobiotics so that we can help to alleviate suffering in the world. People can have happier lives. And thank you, John, and thank you, Mirea, so much for your expertise and help for everyone.
And thank you.
Thank you.